there, fictional friends, and welcome to another episode of Fully Booked. I'm Meaghan.
And I'm Arthur.
And it's the first episode of the month of March. So it's a new theme.
Nice.
And it's
one that I forgot last time. I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah, I think you remembered it like halfway through. Also, it's the start of spring, sort of, kind of, a little bit. We want it to be.
Soon.
Yeah.
It's coming.
It's getting there. The snow's starting to melt. Oh my God, there were so many sounds in the last episode of the cats fighting or playing with their little ribbons or playing with their little toys.
He's doing it again.
And he's doing it again. And they, you know what? They sleep and they don't care about us and they do nothing the entire day. But the minute that we sit down to record, this starts happening. Mooncake, you're stuck. Mooncake, you are stuck. I think you're actually going to have to help him.
Okay, I'm going to help him.
No, okay, no, he's fine.
We need to try different places to record, because maybe if we do it in the reading corner, it's going to be different.
I don't know, maybe, but I feel, you know what, on the few occasions that Shireen has been here to record and not vice versa, like us being at her house, he's followed us into the room too, and he's been like kind of stupid about it. So I think he just has a weird thing when we sit down to record. It's like, you know, him showing up on my camera when I'm in like a work meeting.
Yeah, that's it, of course.
You know, doesn't care the rest of the time, but the minute I sit down. Anyway, unimportant. So we're kicking off the month of March, and we were looking for a new theme for the month, and we settled on something that we've never covered before on the podcast, which is really fun.
Things are different with me on the podcast.
Woo! We talk about sci-fi. We're not talking about sci-fi today. Or this month. Yay! No. To, I guess, change things up for the month of March, we thought it might be kind of fun to delve into like a totally new topic. So this whole month, we're going to be talking about villains in literature. So like the ones that are the most memorable, what's least memorable, about them, the good, the bad, the good, bad aspects of having a villain in your novel. Sometimes
what makes a great villain?
Yeah.
When should be rooting for the villain?
Yeah. Sometimes your villain's the main character. You don't know. Sometimes that happens. And anyway, we're going to be getting into, I guess, like, I don't know, all sorts of facets of that this month.
Starting today with...
Oh, yes. Starting today with... I'm sorry if I sound like shit. I'm sick again. So just bear with me. I'm going to sound more nasal than I already sound, which is, you know, impressive. Starting today with, I guess we're going to start kick things off with a discussion about what makes a good villain, like what makes a great villain in literature, what makes the villain memorable or relatable in some capacity, so that like after you've finished reading the novel, you remember them, you still think about them later on, like, you know, these villains that kind of go down in history.
Exactly.
As that's it, like really cool or really interesting villains to explore. So we're going to talk about that. Before we do, should we try our little bookish news segment? We got to start like shuffling it, kind of like fitting it in a little bit more as we go. But shall we like kick it off with like a few little news pieces? Yeah,
a couple of things that we found interesting. So one of the sucky news is that apparently you can't download your ebooks that you've purchased on Amazon anymore. Yeah, you've used it. Like I don't know, but
no. So basically, what the thing is, and this happened. Unfortunately, this has already happened. I believe it was as of February 26th. I think is what I had seen. But I had seen some warnings and stuff online from people in the book community. Was that basically through your Kindle, you can no longer externally download any books that you purchase from Kindle, so you could no longer like download them after you've purchased them and have them live like in PDF format, let's say, or to move to another type of e-reader. They can only live on your Kindle from now on, and that's Amazon cracking down on not wanting to let people not use their product, essentially, which, surprise, surprise. So that's one thing that's been happening. How fun.
Yeah. And also relatively new right now. You might hear about it when you listen to this. There's a new adaptation of Harlan Coben book.
Oh, it's Harlan Coben, yeah.
Yeah, by Netflix. You said that they basically do one every year.
Oh, they do. I believe, I don't think I've watched the latest one, but there's been one for at least the past like 3 or 4 years.
Okay, well, there you go. Well, he has a great deal because I will find you I will find you.
Yeah.
We'll have Sam Worthington, the guy from the Avatar film franchise.
Yeah,
he's apparently closed a deal to star in the Netflix limited series. Based on the book.
It's always a limited series. There's basically one out a year at this point, so it's like a new Harlan Coben thriller of some kind with a bunch of twists. We've watched some of them, and I feel like you've forgotten which ones they are, but we've watched some of them.
Yeah, that's it. But apparently, Coben has an exclusive deal with Netflix.
He definitely does.
No, he does. That's actually a fact. And this one's going to be an 8-episode series that was ordered in November.
Okay. So we'll see how that plays out. Cool.
That's it. And another last thing, I guess, from me is that they're adapting or rebooting Doing It Again. It's a reboot of Nicholas Sparks' novel, A Walk to Remember.
I love that you question mark it, where somebody like me, somebody who grew up at the time that we grew up but is female identifying, knows exactly what A Walk to Remember is. It was Mandy Moore and Shane West right in the early aughts. It was probably the first Nicholas Sparks adaptation that any of us ever watched.
No.
Oh my God, I love how wonderfully flabbergasted you are by this. I literally have a DVD of this film.
Well, you're going to have another one because they're doing it again.
No, thank you. One is enough. It's sad enough as it is. I don't need to do it again.
Nice.
Yeah.
What'd you find?
I only have one. I don't have very much.
That's fine.
My only one is that, probably a week or so ago, Ali Hazelwood dropped the cover reveal for her next supernatural romance. So was it last February, I believe, of 2024, Bride was published, which was her first foray into the Omegaverse supernatural romance side of things, romance between a vampire and a werewolf. And I remember when, at some point in an episode, whatever, when I was talking about reading the book with Shireen, I said that the way that the novel ended very much left things open for a sequel with different characters. And I was completely right.
There we go.
And unsurprisingly, that's it. It had been announced a little while back, and then about a week ago they did the cover reveal for it, and that's being published in, I believe, October of this year, if I'm not mistaken. You know what? I'm not a huge Ali Hazelwood fan, and some of the contemporary stuff I've read didn't hate Bride. Maybe because it's at least got supernatural creatures in it, so it was a little more fun, and it felt a little quirkier, and I was okay with that.
It's a romantasy, right? From what I understand?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's Omegaverse stuff, so anybody who's read a lot of that stuff is very werewolf-focused, very pack-focused things. There are very specific things on the more sexual ends of things.
It's romantasy, and 2025 is just the romantasy year, so she's obviously going for that.
Well, it's any year that there's any kind of major romantasy novel published. So anytime Sarah Moss or Rebecca Yarros decides to publish something, that whole year will just explode with releases, essentially, which is probably, what's continuing to happen. And Ali Hazelwood's a really big author, so not surprised.
Makes sense.
Okay, before we get started with things, what's on your nightstand right now? What are you reading?
So I am reading an ARC that was given to us by Blackstone Publishing.
Yes.
Thank you, Sarah. Super awesome.
Thanks, Sarah.
So it is a sci-fi book. It's a space sci-fi opera at least from the beginning of me reading it, has a lot of politics involved in it. It's Transmutation Transience by Darkly Lem. And Darkly Lem, despite the fact that it's a super cool name, is actually 5 different authors.
That's a lot of people.
That is very interesting. Yeah, it's 5 different authors who collaborated in writing this. And it is very interesting so far.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's going to get really crazy. It's kind of an interesting mix of the Foundation series science fiction aspect of things. It was very much political and stuff. And apparently it's supposed to be an assassin thriller at the same time. So that's an interesting mix. I'm just getting into it, so this will very soon appear as a review on the website, fullybooked.ca, because I have to finish it by the 18th.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. So, actually, so this is being published March 18th for anybody who might be interested, and we'll have a probably partially spoilered review up there for you around the same time. Good. Great.
What about you?
I'm in the middle of things because I'm always in the middle of things. Let's see. I have done a couple of quick thrillers recently, one of which was a Freda McFadden novel called The Boyfriend, that was a really quick read. That was actually my first Freda McFadden book. I haven't even read The Housemaid yet. Very quick, I can see why people just kind of like snap her stuff up. Very fast paced, very easy to get through. Okay. I think under 24 hours, I was like, whoop, done.
Oh, nice.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. I also recently read a copy of a novel that we'd received from Blackstone, which came, unfortunately, after its publication date, but that's fine. We'll also be putting up a review for that, which I'm actually in the middle of finalizing right now. So we'll also be putting a review up at fullybooked.ca for that novel called The Ends of Things by Sandra Trelekowska. I'm sorry. I probably did not pronounce that properly. Which is, if you like kind of like a fairly fast-paced, like sort of psychological mystery drama kind of thing, almost a la White Lotus, sort of, because it has more to do with the character circumstances than about like a really intense like murder mystery or something happening. It's kind of something that you might enjoy, like in that kind of sphere. The ending of this book, I really don't want to give it away, but the ending of this book went in a direction I actually really didn't expect it to, and the resolution was very different than I thought it would be, and much less traditional than I thought. But it was very interesting to read. It's like, that's it. Small island in the Bahamas, couple on vacation, meet another person. That person appears to go missing, and there's like, other stuff sort of involved in that. Yeah. But it has so much more to do with the interactions between the characters than about the mystery aspect itself, which is cool. Would definitely make a good like limited series. Like it would be very easy, I think, to do something like that. And I believe that this is her first novel, and it's also she's a television producer, I think, by trade. Yes. So I'm not surprised to, find something like this that could be easily adapted, I would think, for TV. And then I also recently just finished Rachel Harrison's latest novel called So Thirsty. She's become pretty famous in the horror sphere for horror novels with a fairly feminist tone to them overall. I really like her stuff. I really love the relationships between the female characters that she always writes into her stories, and this one is no exception. That's it. I read 2 of her other novels before Cackle and Such Sharp Teeth. One was about witches, one was about werewolves, this one was about vampires.
Cool, all right.
So I'm about it. I love Rachel Harrison's stuff, and I'm always a fan of all of that aspect of things. Yeah.
Nice. All right, and now into...
We're going to talk about some
the
villains.
Main thing. Cue segue music.
Yeah. Oh boy. You can add some segue music then in post. Okay, so how do we want to kick things off here?
Let's start with kind of the basics and say what makes a great villain. Just in general, and also what makes a great villain for you. Like what do you think is good, or something that you remember from very good villains that you've read? And we'll give examples afterwards and everything, talk about it, but what makes a good villain?
Yeah. I guess that part of it would be... A large part of it, I think, is probably the amount of relatability that you can kind of find with something like a good villain, where I don't know if I'm going to describe this properly, but where while you may not agree with what they're doing, you can kind of understand at least a portion of their motivations or the opinions that they have about things. I think makes them more memorable, and it makes them more relatable, which means that you're more likely to kind of follow along with their thought pattern. When you just have your very generic supervillain who wants to take over the world for no reason, those are too one-dimensional, and there's nothing to them. There is it's on their cookie cutter, and nothing to be remembered once the story's finished. But if you have a villain whose story feels more grounded in reality in some capacity, or more grounded at least in a reality that you understand, I feel like it's easier to kind of relate to them.
Yeah. See, for me, it's similar to that, but it's also in the sense of I might agree with what they're doing most of the time, because sometimes I'm just rooting for the villain in general. I feel like there's not enough stories where the villain wins. But it's the way they go about it, right? Yeah. So it's their approach, it's their solution that obviously, the main hero is trying to stop them, or whatever it is, prevent them from doing it. So it's the way that they go about it, which might be a little bit too extreme. There's moral ambiguity in the way that they're trying to do things, right? Yeah. So they need to have obviously a clear motivation, So like they should have a reason for their actions just beyond being evil, like you said.
Yeah. Like it needs to be based on something, whether it's like revenge or whatever other motivation they might have for something. There needs,
whether it's big or small.
Yeah, there needs to be something there.
Yeah, that's it. And then it's the ambiguity of how they go about it because they think that they are right? Yeah. So like you have to see it from their perspective in a sense. And like for them, what they're doing is correct.
Yeah.
And maybe the way that they're going about it, that's kind of where it comes to be like, well, I understand what you're trying to do, but maybe it's not the right approach, or at least it would not be the right ethical approach.
Yeah.
In a sense, you know what I mean?
I mean, I think that like also like I don't want to get too much into like we're definitely going to reserve some time later in the month to speak about the idea of like morally gray and anti-heroes and stuff. So I don't want to get into those too much where I feel like that's it for today. We can stick to kind of the idea of the villain where like no matter what, at the end of the story, this is still the villain. They are still the bad guy because what they are doing, like you're saying, it dips way too much into an extreme way of doing things, which oftentimes is what like is the ultimate like failing of the villainous character is because their solution to a problem is so extreme.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That no one should ever be doing anything like what they're doing.
Yeah, that's it. And then I guess a couple of other bullet points that are, important to what something would make a very good villain. So you said some kind of a personal connection, so relatability to it, right?
Yeah.
Also, like a great villain should be a challenge because you can have someone who's like, yeah, I'm gonna take over the world, and then you just kick him off the boat and he dies. So like it has to be a challenge because the hero or the main story has to try to get to the villain, and then they fail and they have to come back, and then there's a denouement, and there's a whole thing. So it has to be challenging, can't just be easy.
Yes, that would be incredibly boring if the
exactly right. And then it's kind of the other thing. So it has the villain has to be memorable, right? Whether through his personality or the menace of it. Like he could be like super pure evil, but if his evil is so intense and crazy that this is what you remember, it makes a great villain. Right.
Yes, no, they have to, it's true that they have to be memorable. Normally I think oftentimes I feel like that's because of their motivations or because of their actions in some capacity. Yes. Like that is what will make them memorable for you. So like once you finish the book, you put it down and you're like, wow, I'm going to be thinking about that character for ages.
Exactly. Or even like their ideology or the way of rationalizing and thinking things.
Sure, yeah.
Because you can be like, I can see where he's getting or they are getting this from or going to, but then you're also like, well, shouldn't do that.
No, that's it. It's like a super broad thing, but it's like a Thanos thing where you're like,
I was just thinking of that, but it's not
Yes, like it's really bad and overpopulated, and like I understand your idea of like not wanting a bunch of people to suffer over a long period of time and die and everything like that, but also snapping your fingers and just wiping out half of all life everywhere is insane.
I mean, it would solve problems,
but also wow.
But also that's intense. So yeah, that's it.
So it's just like random selection genocide. Like it's really fucked up. So
yeah, it's random.
Yeah, I know, but that's nuts.
Anyways, yeah, and then the last thing, it's moments of vulnerability. That's
definitely
what kind of makes it relatable. I think it's under the same bullet point.
Again, you don't want cookie cutter. You don't want one dimensional. This person needs to have whoever.
But you don't want to also have someone who's just pure evil.
Exactly.
Right? Like, because then you can't root for that.
No.
It's like the whole Mike Myers thing. They're just pure
Halloween,
evil.
Yeah.
Halloween goes around, kills everyone, and you're like, okay, but. It's fun to watch, I guess, but I can't relate at all to what you're doing.
But I can't relate to that person. Like, I have no relatability to a character like Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees.
Yeah, exactly. So...
maybe Jason a little bit more because he drowns when he's a kid. I don't know.
Yeah. Anyways, whatever. We're deviating from the book aspect of things. We're talking about movies now.
We're talking about slashers. Anyway.
So I think, like, those are kind of, like, the main bullet points of what makes a great villain. Which ones... would you say that are memorable to you? So taking all of those kind of bullet points into account, which ones do you remember all the time, or maybe like from the classic ones or for the more recent ones that you've read or that you've heard about?
Okay.
What is your choice or top choices?
So I would say I find a lot of the classic ones tend to be the ones that stick with you the most. Because I get it, there's a reason that they're iconic. So like if I go back to like some older texts, maybe a character like Iago from Othello is always like top of the list for a lot of people. a character that's heavily, heavily motivated by jealousy, which is something that a lot of people can relate to, in terms of like a person's personal and or professional accomplishments being something that you wish that you could have that you don't, and that you feel that somebody's been given things, like just envy, the idea of envy, actually like a seven deadly sins thing, right? Like, the idea of envy being something that pushes someone to do something so horrible. And in the case of Othello, it pushes Iago to turn people against him and wind up manipulating him to the point that he kills his wife, and like it's a whole thing. Othello's a tragedy, so everything's miserable and everybody dies at the end, but you know what I mean, like that's like the whole thing, right? And then on the fantasy spectrum, you've got Sauron. I was going to mention that one. I don't think you could ever not talk about like Sauron in terms of like, if you think back to like older stories and you're like, what's a big bad like in a story? Sauron's pretty up there.
It's pretty bad. Fucking starts a whole years and years and years of war, and he's so evil and has such a great presence that he is like, he's felt when he's not even there. You know what I mean?
Correct. Yeah, that's
it's even like just the menace of Sauron potentially happening somewhere down the line is like insane
enough to that's
yeah, exactly. So that's a very good choice.
It's a good one.
Yeah, I don't know, for me I would say, I mean, like that one's not really classic, I guess, but it is one that recurs a lot for Stephen King, and fans of Stephen King would know who I'm talking about. Randall Flagg. Yeah. The Dark Man, the Men in Black,
Rick Flag.
There's
He's
so
got,
many
like,
names.
7 different names.
Oh, more than that.
And he appears in a multitude of different stories as well.
Yeah, exactly. So he is an amazing villain.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if he's relatable to me personally.
Maybe not.
But he is so insane and so chaotic evil.
Yeah.
That you just remember it. Like,
I guess it's impossible for you not to be entertained by a character like that.
Exactly.
Degree, right?
Like like I'm thinking of The Stand and stuff.
Yes.
So he's like, first of all, he brought this upon Earth.
Yes.
For that to happen,
yeah.
technically.
Well,
he kind of did it, whatever. And then he's creating this society of more evil beings, just like kind of the worst of humanity, really, to run this world. And just do insane, batshit crazy stuff.
Yeah.
But he's also trying to kill kind of like the good side of the people.
Yeah.
So he created chaos, and he's creating more chaos, and he also wants to kill any kind of the good thing that happens, or people are trying to solve this problem that is supposed to that occurs to them, and they're trying to rebuild the world. Essentially, he's like, chaos everywhere.
Yeah,
just do it.
I wonder too.
It's amazing.
And like, you might have a better idea than I do of this, but like a character like Randall Flagg, for instance, is interesting because I feel like in The Stand, he has that kind of like personification of evil.
Yes.
Like that's basically what his character is in that story. But you would know better than I would, because I haven't read them, if that is a little bit different than like what you see throughout the Dark Tower series of that character. Or does it stay fairly consistent?
It's very consistent in a very different way. So in the Dark Tower series, the whole thing is that there are towers or beams that hold the balance of the world, essentially. And his whole goal, if I remember correctly, because it's been a long time that I read it, he wants to destroy the beams. So he wants to destabilize the world so that everything that happened just goes to shit. And it's chaos again. So he's a bringer of chaos. That's his thing. Yeah.
So he's always like that.
Basically, yeah. Sometimes he just kind of fucks around. There's a couple of stories that he's like the trickster god. What am I thinking? Come on, it's on the tip of my tongue. Thank you. Yeah, exactly. So he's kind of that. He just kind of appears and just fucks shit up, and then kind of it starts a whole side story or whatever it is.
I feel like he has a more sinister tone than something like Loki does, because it's less just trickster and then tee-hee, I run away.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, he creates fucked up shit. Yeah. But he's usually chaotic evil, if you want to look at it kind of
on that spectrum.
On a graph spectrum type of thing. Yeah, really cool. I like him.
There's obviously characters like Hannibal Lecter, which are very iconic, obviously, across that entire series. You can't just say Silence of the Lambs because he's in all of them. He's from Red Dragon. what Hannibal, whatever the other one is, that's like the prequel, doesn't matter. All of those, whatever. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But like all of that entire series, basically, like that's a character that I think people remember because of how eloquent and articulate the character is, which contrasts so heavily with how horrible and horrifying the acts that he commits are, right? Like he cannibalizes people, which in and of itself is a very taboo topic in reality in the world that we live in general, of course, and thought of mostly across the board as something horrific. But that also, it's in such heavy contrast to a character that's so well educated, so well spoken, and I think that people find that fascinating.
Yeah, but it also kind of makes it even more scary or even more evil.
Yeah, he's not like some little weird person hunched over in a corner.
Yeah, exactly. That you would be like, yeah, this guy's evil. Don't go in that corner.
He's definitely going to eat some people.
That's it. But like he could be just, a normal, casual businessman person in a suit. You cross on the street and,
look, he's a PhD,
that's what I'm saying.
like a very highly respected psychiatrist prior to obviously being discovered and arrested.
Yeah, so that's it. So it makes it even more scarier and makes him a more interesting
iconic,
evil and iconic exactly because of that.
For sure.
Right? And actually you remind me of that. So I've kind of, because you said like more refined and whatever it is, I instantly kind of thought of Dracula. I can't believe we did not mention that.
No, well, hey, we're getting there. We're getting there.
Fine. Well, I mean, so Dracula obviously is one of them, an old one, right? So kind of like Count Dracula embodies the whole horror aspect, but he's also, seductive in his own ways and, talks very well and eloquently and whatever it is. But at the same time, he kind of represents the whole fear of the unknown and I guess the foreign. Yes. Yeah. No one knows him, right?
Because
like it's always like, oh, this castle, don't go there.
Yeah. And Jonathan Harker is warned numerous times as he's making the trek to the castle not to go there, not to do this. But of course still does, and then encounters Dracula and kicks off this entire chain of events that follows of him coming to England and wreaking havoc and doing all of these things. But yes, again, that's it. This is a count. This is somebody with money and access to things. It's different in the novel than like in a lot of the film iterations of it, obviously, but that's something we can talk about a little bit later this month too, because he's such an iconic villain and character that different depictions and different versions of him, I think it's just something we're going to continue to see forever because of like how cemented that character is in culture just in general now.
Yeah, so it would be too weird to change it too much.
Yeah.
No.
And then can we talk about a couple of the fun ones from like children's stories? Those ones,
sure.
Sometimes, I will say yes, sometimes those ones can be maybe a little bit more one-dimensional than some of the other ones that we've talked about, but honestly...
Well, you can't make it too nuanced. It's a children's story.
Agreed, yes. So there has to be a clearer line between the good and the evil.
Exactly, that's it. Because if not, you're teaching children ambiguity
too much of a gray
evil.
area, and it's a little bit... It's not the best idea when they're like 9 years old, right? But at the same time, I find like a lot of those characters can still have a little bit of nuance to them to a degree. So like
Grinch.
Well, actually, kind of.
I was joking, but guess.
It's true.
I guess.
And he learns things
as
the novel, as the story goes on. Come on, it's great. Anyway, my big ones from when I was a kid were Miss Trunchbull from Matilda.
Okay.
Who is like this, like when you're like 8 years old and you're reading Matilda, she's like the scariest teacher you could possibly have. Like she sticks kids in essentially an Iron Maiden in her office.
Oh my
called
God.
The Pokey. That has like gross nails and stuff sticking in like into the inside of it when she wants to punish them and everything. Yeah. Like she's very scary. Like, and she's like big and imposing and like very like rude and horrible to the children, and she mistreats everybody, and she's awful, obviously. And so she's like, the scariest iteration that you could come up with. That we're never going to get rid of all the sounds of the cats in this ever. So she was like a big one for me. But again, she also has some amount of like layer and emotion to her that you do sort of see throughout the course of the story that makes itself clear.
Does she have redeeming qualities?
No, like not really. Oh. Again, that's it, because I think that like for a character in a children's story, there are fewer redeeming qualities for your villains, because you don't want the kids to be like, oh, I want to be like blah blah. Like you don't want the kids to want to be like this character. So like not really, but at the same time, in the children's stories, it's you're more likely to have a villain like a character like Miss Trunchbull be taught a lesson.
Right, of course. Yes.
Whereas, like, you know, in a novel for maybe like an older audience, the villain dies oftentimes, right? Or they're eliminated or they're killed by the hero, whatever. Like, there's like a final confrontation and stuff, which doesn't necessarily happen in a children's novel. Sometimes it does, but they have a little bit more of a tendency to be like taught a lesson in some capacity. And then the White Witch from C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and the Chronicles of Narnia.
Yeah,
she's a really good one. And I feel like she's iconic in a multitude of ways, not only because of the way that she looks, but because of sort of like the power and like the aura that she exudes to a degree. And she's also one who's very similar to like a lot of what you see in like very old folk and fairy tales and stuff like that, right? Like Grimm's fairy tales. So like, you know, like Snow White and all of those, like the evil queen and everything in Snow White. I would say the stepmother in Cinderella, but it's different, you know, like those, not exactly in the same way, but especially she reminds me of the wicked queen in Snow White, particularly, whose vanity drives her, right? Like whose vanity drives her essentially to try and kill this young woman, which is crazy, but you know.
In Cinderella, I think the real villain is her godmother.
The fairy godmother?
Yes.
Why?
Because without her, none of that would have happened.
Yeah, but she gets to live happily ever after at the end anyway. And if you read the original fairy tale...
yeah, I mean, look. Fine.
People get pieces of their feet lopped off, like...
That's fucked up.
That's crazy. That's how much they're trying to fit their feet into the friggin' shoes. Anyway. But yeah, I feel like the White Witch is a great embodiment of, like, what you want your villain to be like in, like, a kid's story, right? Yeah. She entices the children. She manipulates them.
Also
she's able
pretty clear that it's a villain, right?
Very,
like
very clear, except to Edmund. Stupid character. But she's able to manipulate and entice and do these things in order to, you know, at least partially succeed in what she wants. And you're kind of like shown very clearly throughout the course of the story that she's horrible. So, yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah. Makes sense. Do you have another one?
No, I think that was most of what I had.
Cool.
I mean, like Voldemort and stuff like that, but like,
yeah, well,
I don't really need to get into that.
We can name all of them there.
Yeah.
So then, I feel like recently in more modern books, I guess, literature and stuff, villains are becoming a little bit more complex. And
Agreed.
I think we're moving towards that on purpose.
Yeah.
So what do you think villains are becoming a little bit more nuanced nowadays as opposed to before? Like we were saying, it's very much...
Yeah.
Mostly, you know, white and black.
Yeah.
Mostly clear.
White hat, black hat, very clear.
Yeah, that's it. Now it's like, you know.
I just think that in general, as an audience, you know, when we're picking up a book, we're no longer in an age, because the world is so nuanced. We have access to so much information all the time, and we just live in a world now that is post so many different things, post a number of wars that had not existed previously. We live in a post 9/11 world where there's like an additional sort of layer of paranoia on top of a lot of stuff, particularly to do with like security and things, and not trusting people close to you possibly as well.
And there's also like, you know, news is happening or there's a story happening, and depending on where you read it, you can get a whole different perspective without getting into like different sides of politics or whatever it is. But yeah, like you read it on four different sites and it's one story, then you read it on 5 other sites and it's like
it's very different
presented. Or completely different from what you thought it was based on your previous literature.
Exactly.
Reading, right?
And so I think that we're hyper aware at this point that we live in like a very nuanced world now, and people have so many different opinions as opposed to there used to be just like one overarching opinion about a lot of things. That's not really the case anymore. A lot of people have different opinions about stuff, anything that happens in the world. Partially, again, because of such ease of access of information. People have everything at their fingertips now. And so I think that audiences are bored with the idea of that old school, you know, that old school Western, white hats are good, black hats are bad.
Yeah.
And that is who we are, and that's what our stories are. And there's always one clear good and one clear evil. And I just don't think that that's something that people want in their villains anymore. They want their villains to have a reason for doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
That's not just always like, I'm bad, I want to take over the world. But like, fucking why? And the stories that have that now, whether they're books or whether they're film, they don't succeed as well. The ones with those one-dimensional throwaway villains, no one cares about them. People don't like them as much. And they're criticized oftentimes for those plots and those plot points, specifically because we've seen so many stories that can have incredible, complex, and well-written villains. And we want more of that. So that's really, I think, what people are like leaning towards now.
That's it. Yeah, it's exactly that. It's that, people prefer complexity and depth over the one-dimensional stuff 100%. That we mentioned before, right? And like you were saying, it's now, especially now, I guess in more modern times or in more modern stories, we're kind of looking to have villains that have more of a reflection on real life.
Yeah.
Not necessarily happenings, but ideologies. Agreed. In a sense. You know what I mean? So that makes it a lot more interesting than just kind of like supernatural evil.
Yeah.
Or that or whatever it is,
well,
right?
That brings it into a more real space, which sometimes I think you're right. I think people are looking for, which I find brings it into a place where that's it. We do see, and it doesn't happen all the time, but we do see stories that are published in which technically the villain is the main character. Like they are the narrator. They are the protagonist in a way because of the way that the narrative of the novel is written. And so like, I guess a good example of that would be like Patrick Bateman in Psycho. I say in Psycho. Sorry, American Psycho. American Psycho, not Psycho. Sorry, Norman Bates also is up there too in Psycho. Just as an FYI, I've also read that book. But like someone like Patrick Bateman in American Psycho, I find is like a really good iteration of that because, of course, the whole novel is told from his perspective, and he's also an unreliable narrator because of it, and because of the chaos going on in his brain. You can never quite tell where he's going. And then you also get characters like that with someone like Humbert Humbert's character in Lolita, who's also the lead character and the protagonist of that novel, which is often misinterpreted. I won't get into it. Shireen and I did a whole episode about it. It's fine. But that character as well is really the villain of the story and was meant to be. That's how Vladimir Nabokov wrote him, and is treated as such throughout the course of the novel as like a terrible person, basically, for being, obsessed with a young girl. So
so I mean, actually, it's interesting that you mentioned the unreliable narrator thing because there's an interesting question here that should be asked, I guess, or discussed. Is that like, how does an unreliable narrator affect our perception of who the true villain is of the story? That makes it very interesting because you have no idea.
I know.
Until you know, which is really cool.
Do you know where a perfect example of that is? Gone Girl.
Yeah, I know. That's like...
Gone Girl is like probably the most iconic example of that. I think in particularly the last like 20, 30 years that you're ever going to get Amy's character and having the dual narrative. I mean, the novel's a dual narration. It's partially from her perspective, partially from Nick's perspective. But that narration and that build-up in that novel is so brilliantly written that when the reveal comes... Yeah,
you're like...
You are flabbergasted
mind-fucked
by that. When I read that book and I got to that point, I was like, what the fuck? And then halfway through the book, the narration style for Amy's character completely flips. And you get awesome. Her actual way of speaking about things. And it's incredible. It's so good. That's the reason that Gillian Flynn is at the level that she's at.
Yeah, exactly. That's
so good.
That's it. Yeah, that's crazy. Those would be very interesting to read more of. Actually, I should research that. That'd be really
Have you read Gone Girl?
I've seen the movie.
Yeah, I know, but you haven't read it, eh?
No.
Oh man, it's too bad that you haven't, because I will say, like, reading the book before
of course.
Like the movie was actually really well done. We did an episode about it like a while ago, but like the movie's really well done. But that book was like it blew my fucking mind the first time I read it. I was not expecting it. And we didn't have a ton of thrillers at that time that were being published that had that similar style. I find we've had a lot of them since then because it kind of set off a trend in a way. Yes. But at the time, that wasn't really something that we saw super regularly. So yeah, and those are the kinds of, I feel like those types of ones, those unreliable narrator stories are fascinating because you'll finish a book and you're like, I don't know. I don't know how to feel. Like when I finished American Psycho, I was like, I don't know. I don't know how to feel about the character. I don't know do I hate this character? Do I like this character? Like, I don't know. And it's very, very confusing when they're the main character and their narration is the one being presented. Oh my goodness, you two.
Right. So unreliable narrator, great. And also this kind of like loops me back into what I was saying in terms of like chaotic evil villains. Yeah. Because it's not an unreliable narrator story, but because you have no idea what the hell they're doing or why they're doing it in a sense, it also kind of makes it unreliable because they could just be like crazy and doing things for absolutely no reason.
Oh, then for sure.
They get like 1,000 followers and then at the end they're like, he's like, yeah, I just wanted to kill everyone or just burn things down. And
but I had no philosophy, no major thing behind.
Like nothing. Yeah, so that's my thing. I'm like,
I feel like those
I'm all for that.
I feel like those are more difficult to write.
Yes, because it is harder to make that into an interesting story.
Agreed. Without people kind of falling off and being like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's it. You have to have some, like a very good light side or some kind of good debate or whatever it is. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I love a good villain. I love a good villain. I'm going to keep loving a good villain. And I mean, like, we'll talk about, like, Morally Grey. We'll talk about some other stuff as, like, the month continues and, like, all the book talk girlies will, know who I'm talking about when we're talking about a lot of the Morally Grey types. Sure. So, anyway, obviously feel free to check out, like, all of our, coverage about, like, villains and everything over on the website at fullybooked.ca, as well as all of the other content that we have being published on a regular basis from our wonderful team of contributors. And you can definitely follow us on all of our social media platforms, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky. Just search for Fully Booked CA. But until next week, guys, keep on reading.
Ciao, guys.